Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Haleli Azulai.
Hey, welcome back to the TalentGrow Show with episode 55 featuring my guest, Jean Maroney, president of Thinking Directions. Jean and I talk about how you can become a better, clearer thinker so that you can become a better decision maker, so that you can become a better communicator. A lot of the things that we as individuals and as leaders sometimes struggle with, like for example, when someone catches you off guard with a question and you're not sure the answer or you have too many ideas, she really breaks it down. This is one of the most practical and tactical episodes we've ever had on this show. And I think you're going to find it super useful. I can't wait for you to listen to it. And so without further ado, here's Jean Maroney on the TalentGrow Show. I'm Haleli Azulai, your leadership development strategist. And this week, my guest is Jean Maroney, president of Thinking Directions. Jean teaches managers and other professionals how to use targeted thinking to solve problems faster, make better decisions, and get projects finished. They use her tactics to be smarter about achieving their goals, which is why I thought, perfect, we need her on the show. Jean has an interesting background. She's going to tell you about that in a moment, but she actually comes from electrical engineering into this work. But at this time, Jean and her company, Thinking Directions, offers seminars to all kinds of corporations around the country, including BB&T, Microsoft, Amazon.com, and Canadian Bank of Note companies. So I guess not around the country, but around the continent, I should say. Jean, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Haleli.
It's great to have you, and I look forward to talking with you about your subject matter expertise, but I definitely want you to tell us the highlight version of your career journey.
Well, so I started out life as an electrical engineer. I went to MIT and got a bachelor's and master's, and I worked in a very interesting field called adaptive optics, which the lay version of that is taking the twinkle out of stars. I was actually on the first project there's these systems called laser guide star adaptive optics that are used on telescopes to take the twinkle out of stars so that astronomers can see better. And I was on the first project to get one of those things to work.
Oh, a really silly joke comes to mind, like Untwinkle, Untwinkle Little Star was the song you ran.
Right, So it was very exciting. I was very young, had a lot of responsibility, and was totally motivated by the person who was running the project, whose name was Bob Fugate. He was like my epitome. We're both Ayn Rand fans. He was the person in real life who was the productive dynamo, like the heroes in Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead.
Wow. And
I wanted to be like Bob. And I realized that I wasn't that interested in solving the engineering problems. I was much more interested in how to solve problems than in these particular problems. And so to have the same kind of passion for my career that Bob did, I realized I needed to change careers. So I got interested. I basically went into the psychology of thinking is essentially what I do. And I've been in this field since 1992 and making my way, and it is absolutely fascinating. I am as passionate about what I do as Bob was about what he did.
And I love talking to passionate people. Passionate people are the most interesting people. So listeners, take note. If you don't feel passionate about what you're doing, go do something that you can feel passionate about, or find the connection to feel passionate about that which you're doing, because that's going to make a difference in everything. So Jean, thank you for that. That's very cool. And Jean and I have become friends recently because of we have very similar businesses, and we were connected through a mutual friend, and we have a lot of interests in common. So it's been a real pleasure getting to know you, Jean, and I really look forward to sharing your wisdom with the audience listening today.
Thanks, Haleli. I've really been enjoying getting to know you too.
Thank you. So in your work, I know that you organize it around three main themes: taking action, thinking on your feet, and crossing the finish line. This is how you organize, how you teach people about becoming better thinkers and helping. I love your tagline is you help ambitious people achieve challenging goals by teaching them to think better and be more effective in their work. So I wanted to focus, since we only have 30 minutes together total, I wanted to focus on that middle one, which is thinking on your feet, because I feel like that's not something that's addressed quite as much. And we all struggle with that. I really don't think I know anyone who's just, unless you're very naturally good at that, who actively pursues learning how to do that better. So I think people are really going to learn a lot from you today. So what is the best way to prepare for thinking on your feet?
I'm going to have a hopefully not deflating answer.
Okay.
The best way to prepare to think on your feet is to think at your desk in advance. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about thinking on your feet, because you have this thing when you dream about, say, giving a presentation or talking to your boss, and I mean literally, like daydream or whatever, it seems like the words just come and you're brilliant, and it seems like it's completely effortless. And that does happen when you're asked a question and you already know the answer. So when you see someone who looks like they're thinking on their feet, and it's smooth and beautiful and brilliant, they're actually remembering on their feet. They've actually, the question that was asked is something they've heard before and thought about enough before so that they don't have to come up with a completely fresh new answer. Now, you need to be able to do that too. So you need to be able to do both things, because some questions you get are going to be completely unanticipated. But I think that when you see people who seem to be able to think on their feet, I think sometimes you don't realize how much they prepared in advance. So that's one thing that I think is important. There are a couple other things that are mental preparation that are needed. Should I go ahead and tell those too?
Yeah,
well,
definitely.
So one thing that is, you'll get this advice from a lot of people. The biggest barrier to being intelligent sounding when you're asked a question on the fly is that you get nervous and you freeze up. That is a predictable problem. And it's something that you can practice your response to, because what you really need to do at that moment is breathe and remind yourself you get to choose how you're going to respond. So knowing that you have options at that moment can give you a chance. If you pause, remember, okay, do I know the answer? If you don't know the answer, here's what I recommend you do. Start thinking aloud in full sentences. Do you ever do thinking aloud?
Well, I'm sure I do all the time, but tell us more. What do you mean?
Well, you, instead of saying, for example, someone says, well, what is the business growth going to be next quarter? Whatever, some hard question. Instead of saying, well, it's going to be such and such and such, because you know the answer, you say, well, that's an interesting question. And to be able to answer that question, let's see, I'm going to have to estimate this and this and this and this. And I'm going to have to put together this and this and this. And you, in effect, the process that you would do if you were at your desk, the process you would go through, you, in effect, do it out loud as thinking aloud. What this does, it can be helpful to warn the other person that you're going to think aloud here, because this gives a more rambling answer than when you already know it. But if you know that you can have an option when you're blank, you will be much less nervous and much more likely to be intelligible.
I love that. That's a really easy to do kind of solution. And some people just fall into it naturally, but
I think so. Mm-hmm.
But it's really nice to almost like you're giving us permission to do it. And it's a tactic.
It's a tactic, and it's a tactic that it's really a mental set of recognizing that you're in charge and you know what you know and you know what you don't know, and you're not worried about the fact that you don't know something. That there's a confidence element there.
Yes.
If I don't know it, I can work it out, or I can ask the person another question, but I don't have to be in a panic that I don't know the answer right now. Answers can be figured out.
Excellent. Love it. So let's say somebody asks you a question and you have to think quickly on your feet, but you're flooded with ideas. You have too many thoughts, too many things coming at you at the same time. What do you think we should do then?
So this is a great example, because it's an example of take seriously what state you're in. So if you're overloaded in what you're describing there, you got a million ideas. This is, first of all, this is a good thing. So unlike the case where you're blank, where you have no idea what to say, you have a lot of great ideas. And here again, it can be very helpful to say, wow, I have so many ideas in response to that. Now, if you were alone and you had 18 gazillion ideas, you couldn't keep them straight, what would you do? Sitting at your desk with a pen and paper in hand, what is the thing you would do with those 18 gazillion ideas?
I would list them. I would write them down.
You would make a list, right? The reason you make a list is because it reduces the overload.
Mm-hmm.
Until you reduce the overload, you can't think straight. So it's very important to realize that thinking is something that requires some free mental space. So in that situation where you have 18 gazillion ideas, you're talking to the person, wow, I have a million ideas here. Can we just write these down on the board, or shall I just zip them all off to you? You just rattle them off one after another. Even just saying them all aloud can give the person an idea of all the ideas you have. And a list is a known cognitive tool. If you warn the person you're going to give them a list, and then you just go boom, 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 list all the things, they can also see, oh, wow, we're overloaded. Let's go figure out how we're going to narrow this down to one thing.
Yeah.
You, in effect, get the other person to cooperate with you to figure out how to reduce this massive information into one thing.
So I think that what's really great about this advice is that the assumption behind it is that most people that you're talking with are not necessarily expecting you to spit out sound bites that come from, some kind of a training video, where the people have, found the best sentence and rehearsed it and wrote it down in the script. But no, they recognize that you're just a person there with your brain, and here's what comes to mind. And most people are fine with it probably, and are interested in hearing you kind of ramble through until you find the right answer or whatever. But let me ask you this: so sort of a devil's advocate kind of thing. So I'm not trying to trip you up, but I can see how some people that are listening are going to be like, yeah, but I know someone, and there always is someone, and thankfully they're not the majority, but there's always someone who seems to relish maybe like putting you on the spot. Or maybe it's just someone, it's like a very high status person, and it's a very, high stakes meeting, and there isn't very much time, and you're in front of the CEO, and you have to, like, what if they put you on the spot and said, no, I don't have time for you to list all your ideas right now. What's the best one, or something like this? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, yes, I do. And I think you're absolutely right. There are situations where you would not want to think aloud in front of the other person, and you would not want to make a list in front of the other person where there is some external situation where you just need to be brief. And in those cases, you can sometimes ask for permission to do those things, but let's stipulate that you can't do that. Mm-hmm. So you're now in a situation where this person is saying, just tell me the right answer. I don't want to hear all this. Just give me the right answer. What I recommend in that situation is being honest. If you don't know the answer, and this is a high power conversation, pretending to know the answer is a disaster. So the thing that have in your back pocket, this is a great question. I prepared for 18 other questions. I did not see this one coming. I need to go back to my desk to figure this out. I do not want to give you misinformation. Now, if you really don't know, that's the thing to do. Now, on the other hand, if you're selling yourself short, sometimes when you have this list of 18 things and someone says, what's the most important thing? If you just pause for a second and you ask yourself, what's the most important thing? One will come up and you say, yeah, that's the most important thing. So pausing and one sentence in your answer can work. So I gave you two completely different answers. Yeah. One answer is pause, just try to formulate it in one sentence. This is actually really good practice. See if you can give an answer in one sentence. But if you don't have the one sentence, if what comes up is, oh my God, I really don't know the answer here. Mm-hmm. The important thing is not to fake it.
I'm so glad you said that. I almost think that if we were to just reverse the two things you said, it would probably be best to do it in that order, because
yes,
right? Like you would first give yourself a chance, and maybe your intuition would just sort of pop it out for you, and you would have it. Just give yourself a chance. But then if you don't, then you can always just be honest.
Right. And I'll tell you, this is the other reason, if you are having a meeting, say, with the top manager or some hotshot or some important customer, this is one of the other reasons why it's so important to do the thinking in advance.
Yes.
So the preparing at your desk, one of the things that I recommend you do is actually write down all the questions you think you're going to get asked, and write out, not as, you don't have to write, polished prose, but actually try to write out a one paragraph answer to each one of them as if it were an essay question test you were taking. If you test yourself in advance, you'll find out if you can answer those questions. If you know the answers, you can write them out. Great. But if one of them really stumps you, oh my God, this is something that needs to be prepared, because if it stumps you at your desk, it's guaranteed to stump you in person at that meeting.
Yes. Actually, it's funny. One of the things that I sometimes teach people how to do presentations, to give presentations.
Mm-hmm.
So this is when we get to the part where we talk about the Q&A and whether you should have one and how you should prepare for it. It's totally one of my suggestions. Like, try to think about all of the things that people might ask you during the Q&A, because we so often just in neglecting to think through that, we're surprised by things that wouldn't have been a surprise if we took a moment to think about it. So you're actually, there still may be surprises. There may be things that stump you, but you're reducing the number of things that will cause that. Why would you want to put yourself in a nervous state unnecessarily for things that you could have predicted?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Perfect.
I totally agree with that.
Oh, I love it. So, okay. So let's think about another kind of situation. What if you need to think on your feet and you're conflicted? Like, on the one hand, but on the other hand, you don't know which one you choose. What do you say?
Right. So this is I'm going to start sounding a little bit like a broken record. But here again, I think recognizing that this is a real phenomenon. See, I think sometimes people have this view that when thinking goes really well, it seems like you ask yourself a question, you get an answer, no work is done. And it seems like that's the way it should be. But that is just the product of past thinking. That's not the way the actual development of knowledge happens. And so going through conflict is a normal process that you need to figure out what the pros and cons are of the two sides. You need to figure out, what is the standard by which you're going to decide. And so if you're in conflict, this again, it's very helpful to say, like, suppose your boss is asking you for a recommendation for something, or we're talking mid-level managers. It could be one of your people in your group is asking you for advice. Mm-hmm. Say, well, I really think there are two ways to look at this, A and B, and you explain A and B. And let's talk about how we're going to decide which one's best. The way that you get in trouble thinking on your feet or thinking at your desk is when you try to ignore the fact that you are actually facing a cognitive problem. If you try to just wash over and say, okay, well, no, I need to just pick one, and kind of blindly go in and pick one and ignore the other, that's when you get in trouble. When you're willing to sit there with that ambivalence and say, this is not obvious. There's actually a difficulty here, and I'm going to look at this difficulty and examine it. That's when you really can make some progress, because you're opening yourself up to the full set of facts. The big mistakes get made when you try to cut off a set of facts. And so, in fact, conflict is one of the best signals that more thinking is needed in this particular area. It's when people shut down the conflict. Like, for example, you hear about this all the time. You're in a meeting and you have some reservations, but you don't speak up because you don't want to, put yourself forward or whatever. And your reservations turn out to be something that was really important and would have changed the decision in that meeting so that a big mistake wasn't made. I mean, that happens. And so conflict is actually a signal that there are important issues that have not yet been addressed and reconciled.
That's a good frame. And I love the theme throughout all of your advice about just being very authentic and in some ways vulnerable. I feel like I'm preaching this because I speak about that so much. So many people feel so much pressure to put a front on that is perfect, or where they have their act together and they have no reservations and they have no conflicts and they have no insecurities and they never have a blank moment. Like, you're human and we're all human. And if we just allowed our humanity to come across, we actually would be much more likely to cause the other person to empathize with us, to help them connect with us, to build trust, because actually vulnerability is one of the things that is a key component in trust building.
I agree with that. And, people can tell when you are making things up and, trying to put a gloss on it and pretending as if you know more than you know. People can smell that. You can totally smell that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gets you into trouble.
Yeah, it has the opposite effect. It reduces trust. The people, are like, they're sensing something is off. And so it causes them to distrust you. It causes them to second guess the answers you're giving.
Yeah,
it doesn't help.
It doesn't help. And I mean, just even if you think about it, this is one of the other reasons. One of the skills that I teach in my classes is something I call thinking on paper, which is what it sounds like. It's actually writing out your thinking in full sentences on paper. And full sentences turn out to be very important, which I can tell you why if you want.
Yes.
But the thing I was going to say is one of the reasons I think it's helpful to practice thinking on paper is that you can hear yourself saying things, and sometimes you try to BS yourself. Like, oh, this will be the right thing and those problems won't happen or whatever. And if you do this in the privacy of your desk at your thinking on paper and you look back at it and you say, that's total BS. That is not true. You'd be surprised at the thoughts that come out and seem plausible, and when you take a second look at them, they are just false. Like I can get this all done this morning. Oh yeah, right. I can have that done by Friday. Well, what about the other 18 things that are being done between now and Friday? The thought gets blurted out, and if you wind up in thinking on paper, writing it down, and then noticing, wow, that's totally not true, you get more comfortable with the idea that thoughts can occur to you that are simply not true. And that if you are talking to someone, the comfort level with the fact that some thoughts that occur to you are not true gives you more confidence to pause and just make a little check before you actually blurt out that sentence. You ask yourself, is that true? Okay, and then you blurt it out. And so I guess it's not a blurt then. You say it instead of blurt it. And that half-second check before you say it makes a huge difference in your credibility, not just with the other person, but with yourself. Because you know that you're behind the things you say, and you don't commit yourself to things that you realize in hindsight, wow, that was a dumb thing to commit myself to.
So it sounds like you're almost, by doing the exercise of thinking and writing, which I want to ask you a little bit more about, you are training your brain to pause and reflect on your own thoughts.
Yes, you get to know your own mind more, and you get used to sort of the process of thinking and going step by step and challenging your own thoughts. And when that becomes very comfortable, it's like any other thing. If you practice in slow motion, it's much easier to do it at speed.
How do you recommend people do this? Let's say, someone's listening right now, they're saying, that's a great idea. I'd like to try to do thinking in writing. Is this a thing?
Thinking on paper, I call it.
Okay, I'm sorry that I'm saying it wrong. Yes.
Totally fine.
Paper. I forgot how you said it. It was clever. Okay, thinking on paper. Clearly, get it. Okay. So is it like around a problem, or is it a daily practice, or like journaling? What do you say?
So I would always recommend that if you were going to try out any tactic I offer, you do it on a real problem. I don't believe in fake problems. But the truth is, you always have one. Like, for example, every morning, when you come to your desk, you need to decide, what are my priorities for today?
Right.
And that's not a trivial question. I think for most people, there's actually some fresh thinking that's needed every morning, because it depends on what happened yesterday and what emails have come in. It's in flux. If you decide today what your priorities are tomorrow, the chances are the situation will have changed and you'll need to do some fresh thinking on that. Mm-hmm. So on something like that, like, what are my priorities? Instead of just sitting at your desk and saying, what are my priorities in your head, and saying, oh, I think it's such and such. Take out a pen. You can do this on the computer typing if you prefer. Write out, what are my priorities? Literally write those words. What are my priorities? ? And then some thought is going to occur to you. Like, I think I need to get that email out to so-and-so. And so you write, I think I need to get that email out to so-and-so. Now, by the time you've actually written that sentence, a few other thoughts will have occurred to you, and don't worry about that. The most important one will still be with you, and you say, well, and it could be either, yeah, that's the most important thing, or it might be, well, what about so-and-so asked for such and such? Isn't that more important than this email? I don't know what your next thought is going to be, but I do know that if you take the 3 seconds to write the first sentence of, I think I need to send that email, you will consider that thought longer, and any objections to it will have time to occur to you. So you are much more likely to vet that thought and either be able to affirm it or go on to some other issues. Sometimes when I do thinking on paper, I literally only write a sentence or two. Sometimes I only write the question and the answer is so obvious I'm done. Other times, it turns out my priorities are hard. There's 6 things I'm supposed to do. It's really clear I can't do all 6 of them today. And I'll wind up writing out a page, which could take 10 minutes. But my God, if you can take 10 minutes and really be clear on what your priorities are for today, that 10 minutes is really well spent.
Yeah, that's a great investment. So you're saying definitely don't write bullets, right? Like don't list tasks or items or names of topics, but you're saying write out the entire sentence.
Right. So this is the difference between making a list and doing thinking on paper. So sometimes you need a list. A list is a great thinking tool. I am totally pro lists. So if you have 18 things on your mind, by all means, write a list of those 18 things. Just write them down. Mm-hmm. Now, if when you look at that list, you can just write down 1, 2, 3, and you're done, you are morally certain you know your priorities. Great. However, if there are 18 things on that list, I bet that that's not going to be the easiest thing in the world to do.
Right.
Do you agree with me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard. So just put that list to the side and start saying, and then use the language that occurs to you. I had suggested what are my priorities, but when you look at this list of 18 things, the question that occurs to you might be, oh my God, I have 18 things. I can't possibly do all of these. Which one do I need to do first? Mm-hmm. And if that is the thought that occurs to you, that is a great thought to write down, because that is the literal question you have. And that thought may actually, it could prompt, I don't want to second guess what it's going to prompt, but the next thought that it prompts, if you do this in paragraphs, as if you're writing to yourself, you'll actually deal with the biggest issue. Instead of being in some algorithmic way, well, this and this and this, like you figure you need to just know the answer. If you know what the priorities are and you can just put numbers on them, you don't need to think about it. But if you don't know the priorities, you actually need to think it through. And that's something that's done in sentences. That's something where, in effect, you need logic. You need to see, well, I can't do all these 18 things today. I don't even think I need some way to reduce it down to a fewer number because 18 is so much, it's mind-blowing to me. How am I going to reduce it down? Oh, maybe I could just do a quick sort and get the top 5. Okay, now you go back to your list. Can you figure out the top 5? Sometimes you can easily pick out the top 5. Is that enough for you can now pick 1, 2, 3? I don't know. The point is, whenever it gets hard, whenever you find, here's the test. If you're thinking about something and nothing has happened, you need thinking on paper to help slow it down and make it go more effectively.
Great sentence. Oh, I love it. Okay. I wish we could go for so much longer, but we need to start wrapping up. So before we tell listeners something really actionable they can do today, and before we leave them with how to get in touch with you and learn more from you, what's something that's exciting in you on your horizon, Jean?
Well, I'm working on a book, and it seems to be going well. We'll see.
That's exciting.
It's titled Smarter, How to Solve Problems Faster, Make Better Decisions, and Avoid Dumb Mistakes.
Everybody needs that book. All right. So good. Well, then we'll definitely have to keep in touch, and we'll tell people about it when it does come out. So what's one specific action that listeners can take to help them be even better and or more efficient or more critical thinkers that they can take today, tomorrow, this week?
So I'm going to suggest that that's thinking on paper.
Okay.
And so I would say the next time you notice, wow, this is hard or this is important, I need to think about that, switch to thinking on paper.
Great. And I loved how specifically you explained it. So I know people are ready and will do it. Do it. Okay. So how can people learn more from you and about you, Jean? How can people stay in touch?
Sure. Well, my website is thinkingdirections.com. That's thinking, like we've been talking about, directions with an S. And if you go to that site, I have a newsletter that you can get. And I also have a freebie called the Smarter Starter Kit. And that includes an 1-hour audio where I teach thinking on paper. And there's a write-up called How to Focus Your Thoughts for Action, which is a write-up on how to do thinking on paper. So there are several, those free resources. That's something that you could do. You get it if you sign up for my newsletter. And that would be a great way for us to stay in touch.
Absolutely. And I think that should be a huge value to everyone listening because it can give you even more specific instructions. And I will link to all of that in the show notes page. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to speak with the Talent Growers community. We appreciate you. And
thank you.
You're welcome. Our pleasure. And everyone listening, go take action.
Great. Thanks, Haleli.
My pleasure, Jean. So what did you think? Wasn't this extremely practical advice? I think that this is something that everyone could use. And for every one of us, regardless of how much of an issue this is for us, it can take us to the next level of being better decision makers and better leaders. So I hope that you'll take Jean's advice and that you'll apply it right away. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. As you know, the Talent Grow Show is part of the C-Suite Radio network of business podcasts that will help you improve your personal and professional life. So I hope you'll check it out on the C-Suite Radio network, which is at c-suiteradio.com. And of course, as you know, this show is something that I enjoy putting together for your benefit. And if you found it useful, maybe some other people you know would too. So maybe just take a moment and share this episode or some other episode with one or two other people that you know, and just send them a text message or forward it to them in an email or tell them about it at your lunch break. But the best way to get the word out about this show to other people so that we can keep adding value in the world is by listeners recommending it to other future listeners. So if you would, that would be an amazing thing to do. You would be adding value to that person because you're giving them something that you deem valuable. And so you're doing something good for them. You're strengthening your relationship with them. And of course, you're doing something that helps this show get more listeners, which is something good for me. So thank you on my behalf and as well as on the behalf of the person you're about to help. And until the next time, I am Haleli Azulai. I am your leadership development strategist, and I hope that you make today great.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Grow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.